Hello, my dear curious and studious students of surgery. Myself, Dr. Mahesh Chaudhary. I am warm welcoming you in my surgery lecture series. This surgery lecture series contains entire surgery with anesthesia, with radiology, with orthopedic. So stay tuned with us. Let's start our surgery lecture series. Welcome, my dear students, in my surgery lecture number 113, that is the salivary glands. In this lecture, we will explore the parotid gland, its anatomy, parotid duct and parotid glands, submandibular salivary glands, sublingual salivary gland, acute suppurative parotitis. All these points are covered in this lecture. Now first we start with the salivary glands. These are the three pairs of the major salivary glands: the parotid, the submandibular and the sublingual glands. Besides this, there are also the anterior lingual glands and numerous small glands in relation to the mucous membrane of the lips, cheeks and roof of the mouth, and in the mucous membrane of the tongue. There are also numerous small labial, buccal and palatal glands. First salivary gland is the parotid gland. This is the largest salivary gland and lies below the external acoustic meatus between the mandible and the sternomastoid. It projects towards onto the surface of the masseter, where a small part of it may be detached and lies between the zygomatic arch above and the parotid duct below. The detached portion is called accessory parotid gland. This gland forms an irregular lobulated yellowish mass. Dear students, here is a good image showing this all salivary glands, that is the parotid glands, submandibular glands and the sublingual glands. All the anatomical structures are clearly seen in this image. You can watch it by stopping the video. And this is the another image showing the facial nerve, its 5 branches, parotid glands, submandibular glands, sublingual glands and their ducts is clearly seen in this image. Now the coverings of the parotid glands. Parotid gland is covered by a true capsule which is nothing but condensation of fibrous stroma of the gland. On its outer side, the true capsule is covered by the layer from the deep cervical fascia which is called a false capsule. At the inferior border of the parotid gland, the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia splits to enclose the parotid glands. The superficial layer which covers the parotid glands extends upwards under the name of the parotid fascia and is fixed to the zygomatic arch. The deep part of the fascia which passes deep to the parotid gland is attached to the styloid process and the mandible and acquires the name of the stylomandibular ligament. It is also attached to the tympanic plate and blends with the fibrous sheath of the muscles related to the gland. The stylomandibular ligament is thickened and it intervenes between the parotid duct, parotid and the submandibular gland. It must be remembered that the parotid fascia is quite thick and tough, so much so that the parotid abscess does not show fluctuation until very late. Now the surfaces of the parotid gland. The parotid gland is a pyramidal in shape and presents superficial anteromedial, posteromedial and small superficial surfaces. The lower part of the gland tapers to a blunt ending. The superficial surfaces is covered by the skin and the superficial fascia which contains the facial branches of the great auricular nerve and the superficial parotid lymph nodes. The posterior border of the platysma also lies in the superficial fascia. The anteromedial surface is grooved by the posterior border of the ramus of the mandible. It covers the posterior-inferior part of the masseter muscle, the adjoining part of the mandibular ramus and the lateral aspect of the temporomandibular joint. It also passes forwards on the deep aspect of the ramus to reach the medial pterygoid muscle. The branches of the facial nerve emerge from under cover of the anterior margins of the surface. The posterior surface is molded on the mastoid process, sternomastoid muscles, the posterior belly of the digastric, the styloid process and the styloid group of the muscles. The external carotid artery grooves this surface before it enters the substances of the gland. The superior surface is concave and is related to the cartilaginous part of the external acoustic meatus and to the posterior surface of the temporomandibular joint. The auriculotemporal nerve winds round the neck of the mandible and enters the gland through this surface. The lower extremity of the gland overlaps the posterior belly of the digastric and the carotid triangles to the variable extent. Now the structures within the gland, that is the parotid gland. The external carotid artery pierces the posteromedial surfaces of the parotid gland and divides into its terminal branches. The maxillary artery and the superficial temporary artery within its substances. The maxillary artery leaves the anteromedial surface and runs deep to the neck of the mandible, while the superficial temporal artery gives off transverse facial branches and then ascends to appear at upper limit of the gland. The posterior auricular artery may arise from the external carotid artery within the gland and then leaves through the posteromedial surface. On the more superficial plane that the external carotid lies the retromandibular vein, which is formed in the upper part of the gland by the union of the maxillary and the superficial temporal vein. The retromandibular vein emerges from the gland behind its lower extremities and joins the posterior auricular vein to the form external jugular vein. On a still more superficial plane of the facial nerve transverse the gland. It enters the upper part of the posteromedial surfaces and passes forwards and downwards behind the posterior border of the ramus of the mandible, where it divides into two main divisions, and these are the temporofacial nerve, which runs sharply upwards, and second is the cervicofacial nerve, which continues the course of the parent nerve downwards and forward. The temporofacial nerve further subdivides into the temporal and zygomatic branches, whereas the cervicofacial nerve further divides into the buccal and mandibular and the cervical nerves. These five branches leave the anteromedial surface of the gland. And the next structure within the gland is the auriculotemporal nerve, which encircles the middle meningeal artery, runs backward under cover of the neck of the mandible and passes laterally behind the temporomandibular joint to enter the upper part of the parotid gland. The ultimately leaves the gland through the superficial surface and ascends posterior to the superficial temporal vessels. So, mainly the contents are the external carotid artery and its terminal branches, the retromandibular vein and its main tributaries, the facial nerve and its main branches. These three structures are placed in a manner within the glands that the artery lies in the deepest plane and the vein lies in the middle and the facial nerve lies in the most superficial plane. Within the parotid gland, the facial nerves and the retromandibular vein divide the parotid gland into two parts, the superficial part and the deep part, by the faciovenous plane, which is known as the Patter's faciovenous plane. Now, the structure of the parotid duct, it carries secretions of the parotid gland to the mouth. It is about 5 cm in length. It comes out through the anterior border of the gland, crosses the masseter muscle, and at the anterior border of this muscle, it turns inwards nearly at the right angles, passes through the corpus adiposum of the cheek, suctorial pad of the fat in the infant, and pierces the buccinator. It then runs for a short distance obliquely forward between the buccinator and the mucous membrane of the mouth and opens into the small papilla in the mucous membrane of the cheek, opposite the crown of the second upper molar tooth. Now, the second pair of the salivary gland is the submandibular salivary gland. It consists of a large superficial part and smaller deep part, which are continuous with each other round the posterior border of the mylohyoid muscles. The superficial part, this part is situated in the digastric triangle. It has three surfaces, an inferior, a lateral and the medial surfaces. These glands is also covered on both aspects by splitting of the intervesting layers of the deep cervical fascia. These fascia split the superficial parts, cover the submandibular glands and is attached to the inferior border of the mandible. The deep part covers the medial surfaces of the glands and is attached to the mylohyoid line on the medial surfaces of the mandible. The inferior surface, which is in fact the superficial surface of the gland, is covered by the skin, platysma and the deep fascia. It is crossed by the facial vein and cervical branch of the facial nerve. It is also in close relation with the submandibular lymph nodes, and few may actually be embedded within the glands. The lateral surface is in the relation with the submandibular fossa of the inner surface of the body of the mandible and with the insertion of the medial pterygoid muscle. The facial artery is embedded in the groove in the posterior and superior part of the gland. The artery first passes up between the lateral surfaces of the gland and the medial surface of the mandible and then curves downwards to reach the lower border of the mandible. The median surface is related in front of the mylohyoid muscle, separated by the mylohyoid nerves and the vessels. Posteriorly, this surface is in relation with the styloglossus muscles, the styloid ligaments and the glossopharyngeal nerve, which separates it from the wall of the pharynx. In the intermediate part of the medial surface is in the relation to the hyoglossus muscles, the lingual nerve, the submandibular ganglion and the hypoglossal nerve and the deep lingual vein in that the outer from above downwards. Dear students, here is the image again you are watching on your screen, that is clearly showing the submandibular gland, sublingual gland and the parotid gland. Now the deep part of the submandibular salivary gland is this part of the submandibular gland lies in the interval between the mylohyoid muscles below and laterally and the hyoglossus and the styloglossus muscle medially. It is related above to the lingual nerve and the submandibular ganglion and below to the hypoglossal nerve and deep inguinal vein. The gland can be felt bidigitally between the index finger placed on the floor of the mouth and the thumb placed outside of the medial and just in front of the angles of the mandible. The mandibular duct is also about 5 cm length. It begins by the numerous branches in the superficial part of the gland and emerges from the middle of the surfaces of that part of the gland a little behind the posterior border of the mylohyoid. It then runs through the deep part of the glands and comes out the gland to run between the mylohyoid and the hyoglossus. It then passes between the sublingual glands and the genioglossus and opens by a narrow orifice on the floor of the mouth on the summit of the sublingual papilla at the side of the frenulum of the tongue. Now, the next and the last salivary gland is the sublingual salivary gland. This is the smallest of 3 main salivary glands. It is situated beneath the mucous membrane of the floor of the mouth in contact with the sublingual fossa of the inner surface of the mandible close to the symphysis. It is the almond shape, narrow and flattened. It is related above to the mucous membrane of the mouth which is raised in the form of the sublingual fold. It is related below with the mylohyoid. In front it is related to the fellow of the opposite side and behind it is related to the deep part of the submandibular gland. Laterally it is related to the inner surface of the mandible and medially with the genioglossus muscles from which it is separated by the lingual nerve and the submandibular duct. Now again the parotid gland. Now we are seeing the disease of the parotid gland. First is the acute suppurative parotitis. Acute inflammation of the salivary glands most frequently occurs in the parotid, but occasionally the other salivary glands may be involved. Causative organism is mainly the Staphylococcus aureus, but Streptococcus viridans or the pneumococci may be involved. Organism reach the glands from the mouth through the Stenson's duct. Blood-borne infection is rare. 2 and etiological factors play major role is causing the infection of the salivary gland, and these are the when the salivary flow is reduced owing the dehydration following the major surgical operation or starvation or following radiotherapy, and second etiological factor in the acute suppurative parotitis, that is the partial obstruction of the duct with the retention of the secretion owing to the presence of calculus. Dear students, here is a good image showing the greenish color showing the acute suppurative parotitis. Now the clinical features of this acute suppurative parotitis, and these are the patients mainly complain of the pain and swelling of the side of the face. This is the main clinical features. There is a browny or edematous swelling over the parotid region with all signs of inflammation. The temperature is usually higher up over the 38 degree of centigrade. There may be the widespread cellulitis of overlying skin which looks dusky red. If the parotid gland is pressed, pus may be seen coming out through the internal opening of the parotid duct. Now the treatment of this condition is to improve the general state of the patient. Meticulous oral hygiene should be practiced. Teeth should be cleaned with the toothpaste and a toothbrush. Sodium bicarbonate mouthwash should be used for edentulous patient. Dentures should only be used during meals. Soft diet should be prescribed as chewing is painful. A suitable antibiotic should be started immediately. Gentle parotid massage at regular intervals is quite helpful in excluding the pus when the pus stops draining through the duct and the local and general condition deteriorate. Drainage of the gland should be considered. Browny induration over the parotid region is another indication for drainage of the gland. When such is seen over the lower pole, drainage is more essential as an abscess of the lower pole may drain spontaneously into the external auditory meatus. Now the next point is the acute parotitis. This condition may be due to a virus or more rarely by the tuberculosis or actinomycosis or cat scratch disease. Mumps is a viral disease which is often causes acute parotitis. It is a non-suppurative condition. It may be unilateral to start but becomes bilateral within a few days. It is associated with constitutional disturbances and other manifestations of mumps. Recurrent subacute or chronic parotitis, that is the sialoadenitis. This condition often occurs as a sequel to an episode to acute inflammation or as the result of the intermittent obstruction by calculus or by the autoimmune disease and fourth is when it occurs on both sides, the Sjogren's syndrome should be suspected. Recurrent attacks of pain and swelling of the discharge of small amount of pus in the saliva are the typical complaints of this acute parotitis. Due to the retained secretions, ductules dilates and acini becomes atrophic. The glands is progressively replaced by the clinically inflamed scar tissue. Even in the Sjogren's syndrome, patients may complain of unilateral pain and swelling. This is often due to the calculus as complication of reduced salivary flow of Sjogren's syndrome. Dear students, here is a good image of the acute parotitis on your screen you are watching. This is the good picture of acute parotitis. Now the treatment of the acute parotitis is the infection should be controlled by the antibiotics. If stone is present, it should be removed. If the duct is constricted and causing obstruction to the flow of the saliva, it should be dilated through the mouth. Duct irrigation or even radiotherapy may be required when there is no stone or definite constriction of the duct. Total conservative parotidectomy is advocated if the above measures fail. Superficial parotidectomy is contraindicated as the remaining sylectic deep lobe may produce a troublesome post-operative salivary fistula. Dear students, here is the end of our surgery lecture number 113, that is the salivary glands. Thank you.